Good afternoon, all. This is my third attempt to make this video. I tried to use my computer because my phone was recharging, but there's something wrong with the video camera on my computer. It's coming up with skittery images that don't look like anything, and they're way too dark. Anyway, I want to do a review of one of my favorite science fiction novels of all time, and that is Ursula K. LeGuin's The Dispossessed from 1974. It was actually written in 73, but published in 74. It won all three of the major science fiction awards for 1975, the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, and the Locus Award. And this is the first edition, which is published by Harper & Row. As you see, it's got a very lovely wraparound cover by Fred Winkowski. This is the copy that I read because, although it's in the first edition, it's not in great shape. And I didn't want to bend the pages of the paperback, which is this one. This is the one that I first read in high school in 1974. This is from Avon Books, which is, of course, an imprint of Harper & Row, a subdivision of Harper & Row. The book is very interesting. It's a novel of ideas and conflict of ideas between two different planets. Anarres, which is arranged into a anarcho-syndicalist society. They work principally by what early Russian anarchist Prince Peter Kropotkin referred to as quote-unquote mutual aid. That is, the need of the society comes before their own need. They do not have any property ownership. They do not have any centralized government. They don't have laws. They don't have prisons. They don't have formalized marriage or relationships. Everything is basically voluntary, and the people are allegedly free. And I say allegedly because the subtitle of this book is An Ambiguous Utopia, and I'll explain what that means in a bit. But actually, the first paragraph of the book explains it better, and I'm going to read this. There are going to be some spoilers in this, so if you haven't read it, you might want to stop watching right now. I'm going to read you just this first few paragraphs because they're very pivotal into what the themes of the book are. And it starts with, each chapter starts with maps of both Anarres and Urras, and the odd chapters take place on Anarres in the main character Shevek, who's a physicist's past, and the odd chapters take place on Urras in his present, and the final chapter takes place in the future. So it starts, there was a wall. It did not look important. It was built of uncut rocks, roughly mortared. An adult could look right over it, and even a child could climb it. Where it crossed the roadway, instead of having a gate, it degenerated into mere geometry, a line, an idea of boundary. But the idea was real. It was important. For 7 generations, there had been nothing in the world more important than that wall. Like all walls, it was ambiguous, two-faced. What was inside it and what was outside it depended upon which side of it you were on. Looked at from one side, the wall enclosed a barren 60-acre field called the Port of Anarres. On the field, there was a couple of large gantry cranes, a rocket pad, 3 warehouses, a truck garage, and a dormitory. The dormitory looked durable, grimy, and mournful. It had no gardens, no children. Plainly nobody had lived there or was even meant to stay there long. It was, in fact, a quarantine. The wall shut in not only the landing field, but also the ships that came down out of space, and the men that came on the ships, and the worlds they came from, and the rest of the universe. It enclosed the universe, leaving Anarres outside, free. Looked at from the other side, the wall enclosed Anarres. The whole planet was inside it, a great prison camp, cut off from other worlds and other men in quarantine. That is the principal, quote-unquote, ambiguity of the alleged utopia. Shevek, the main character, is a physicist. He's working on a theory called the principles of simultaneity, and also what he calls his general temporal theory. What he wants these things for is to give people possibly a means of faster-than-light travel, space travel, and also a means of communication instantaneously across any field of space, and with no delay, and possibly even matter transmission between point A and point B with no delay. But he's impeded somewhat by the fact that the moral obligations of Anarres society, which they call their form of organization, which is not a formal government, they call it Odonianism because it was based upon principles created by a woman named Odo who lived on Urras and eventually asked their capitalistic government if she could form a splinter group of what they called settlers and land on the planet that they referred to, Urras refers to as the moon, which is Anarres, which is a very barren desert planet where very little grows. They don't have any natural animal life, and they would have a very hard scrabble existence. Eventually they agreed, and this novel takes place 170 years after that settlement was established, on the lines of a Kropotkinist anarchist state. For those unfamiliar, Prince Peter Kropotkin was a Russian anarchist who proposed the idea of society based without central government, but based on what was called mutual aid, the principle that the guiding principle in life should not be self-interest, but the interest of society as a whole. And that if one did this, one would be more free than if one lived in a organized government, which he refers to as the state. And that refers somewhat back to another anarchist by the name of Nestor Makhno, who was very contemptuous of the state. Makhno led a party known as the Greens, who were trying to form a anarchistic government after the October Revolution in 1917, and were not successful. Were basically oppressed and killed. Makhno, I don't believe, was killed, but most of his followers were. You should read his book, The Struggle Against the State, if you haven't, and you should read Prince Kropotkin's Mutual Aid to give you background into what these ideas were. You don't have to agree with them, but they're interesting anyway. I don't agree with people who say that this is a book about communism versus capitalism. It's not. Anarchism is not communism, not the way that it was organized in the Soviet Union. Soviet communism was basically more of a dictatorship, and people were not free to choose what they wanted. The workers never had the means to control the means of production the way that Lenin imagined them, or Marx, I should say. And it did not operate on those principles of no property and no ownership and no classes. There were still classes in Russian communism, and that's very apparent to anybody who studied it. Nor is it a diatribe against capitalism. The two forms of government are contrasted, and the principal character, Shevek, as I said, gets to see these up close because he does something unprecedented. In 170 years, no one has traveled back to Urras, the home planet, from Anarres. They follow this Odonianism. They work for each other's mutual benefit. They do not own any property. They do not have any central government. They don't have any laws. They don't have marriage. They don't have divorce. They do not stigmatize sexual activity of any kind. And they allow people freedom to choose what they field of work they want to a certain point. And if you go back to that statement about walls, one of the things they do is they induce a kind of societal guilt that if people even say things like, my hand hurts, they don't say that. They say, the hand hurts. They won't say anything that indicates that they possess anything. Through several chapters in the book, Shevek constantly says, I have nothing, I own nothing. And that is part of the central principle of Odonianism. And to be a true Odoni, you have to be really, quote unquote, free, you have to own nothing, and you don't to not want to own anything. Well, his theory of singularity contrasts this because it is a theory that not everybody understands. It does not provide a mutual benefit for this society. What his theory is, put bluntly, is similar to a somewhat discredited scientific idea called block universe theory or eternalism. What that theory says is that time is not an arrow that moves from the past through the present to the future. They all exist simultaneously. It's only our perspective that makes it seem like time moves in one direction, but it's actually more cyclical. It does not move from the past to the present to the future. They all kind of go around in a rotation. And one illustration I can give of this that's practical, think of driving down a road. You are where you are at the moment, But if you look in the rearview mirror, you can see where you were 5 seconds ago. If you look out the front window, you can see where you're going to be 5 seconds from now. So technically, you can see the past, the present, and the future all at once. They all exist simultaneously for you while you're driving that vehicle. Expand that out to the universe, and that's, in a nutshell, is block universe theory. There's mathematics behind it that I don't understand and I can't explain. But as I said, the theory has been somewhat discredited. But it wasn't at the time, and it was rather a bit revolutionary for LeGuin to mention this. So Shevek wants to develop this theory, and he's stymied in some ways by this moral obligation that people have to aid each other to such a degree that when they ask for work assignments from the division of labor, which they call a DivLab, they're based on what's best for society, and they may not be in the best interest of the individual. They may split up partnerships. They don't have formal marriage, but they do have partnership. But if one partner is asked to go off to area A and the other partner is asked to go off to area B, they just do it. They don't challenge. They could challenge things and say, no, I want to stay with my partner, but they don't. They've been bred to have a kind of societal guilt where they feel it's their obligation to go where DivLab sends them. Shevek is made to work on a reforestation program which diverts him from completing his principles of simultaneity, as he calls them. And eventually, very few people understand his theory, and therefore it's looked at as sort of antisocial or anti-anarchist. And they're trying to discourage him and make him go into some other field. But he's very single-minded and wants to do this. He is sort of a fish out of water, and that relates to what the title "The Dispossessed" means. I think people misunderstand. They think that means that he doesn't have any possessions, but he sums it up himself much better than that. And I think one of the things he comes to realize that he's not going to get anywhere in developing this theory because of the way his society is organized. And the only way he can really do this is to sort of fight against it, which is against his own principle, but also against the principles of society. He's a very lonely individual. And he says that, I wrote down the quote and now I can't find it. I'll find this quote in a moment. Oh, here. It's on page 79 of the hardcover. And I'll read this to you because it's very prescient, I think, about not only about Shevek's character, but about the way he feels as like he's a fish out of water in both these societies, Anarres and Urras. He had come to love Urras, but what good was his yearning love? He was not part of it, nor was he part of the world of his birth. The loneliness, the certainty of isolation that he had felt in the first hour aboard the Mindful, that's the ship that took him to Urras, rose up in him and asserted itself as his true condition, ignored, suppressed, but absolute. He was always alone here because he had come from a self-exiled society. He had always been alone in his own world because he had exiled himself from society. The settlers had taken one step away. He had taken two. He stood by himself because he had taken the metaphysical risk. And he had been fool enough to think he might serve to bring two worlds together to which he did not belong. That is the kernel of who Shevek is and why he himself does not work within this twin planetary system. He's not a capitalist, and he's not really an anarchist either. He's an individual in a society that suppresses individualism. Like I said, to the fact that they don't say this is my mother, they say it's the mother. They don't say this is my possession about anything. They basically look at themselves as knowing nothing and having nothing, and that's what they want. They want everything to be for society and nothing to be for an individual. Well, he doesn't really want to live that way. He wants to develop his theory. He wants to live with his partner Takfur and his daughter Sekul, and he is encouraged by another scientist who's actually sort of his rival on Anarres, another physicist called Sabul, who has developed a different theory, which is anachronistic. It's not as up to date as the theory of simultaneity, but he wants to push that theory over Shevek insists on editing his quote-unquote principles of simultaneity, putting his name on it and watering it down to match with his theory, which is called the theory of singularity. And he encourages, we don't really know why, he encourages, maybe out of rivalry or jealousy, Shevek to publish this on Urras, where there are theoretical physicists who understand this theory more than they do on Anarres, because their society is not anarchistic and is not based on mutual aid. It's a standard capitalistic and patriarchal society. Women are made to shave their heads and walk around half naked most of the time. And the lower class, the unproperty class, are suppressed by the property class, which is something that Shevek is totally against. But he agrees, and he's going to go, and that makes him, to his people, he begins to be looked at as a traitor. And they start making life very difficult for him and for his partner. People can form partnerships that they don't have formal marriage. They're kind of loose and open, and they can still have sexual affairs without there being any difficulty. For instance, he sleeps with his homosexual friend Bedap on a couple of occasions, but it doesn't interfere with his relationship with Takfur, which is on a deeper emotional level for him. I'm not going to spoil this whole book for people. I wrote down a whole bunch of quotes, but I'm not necessarily going to reference them. He eventually he goes to Urras on this spaceship, the Mindful, which is a freighter. And he's received sort of as like a fish out of water. He says, well, here's your anarchist. Now what are you going to do with him? To his host. And he's starting to work on his theory. They take him to their city, Neo-Essia. There's big gleaming skyscrapers, and they have modern museums and industry. He had expected, based on propaganda on his own planet, that the Urras were going to be lazy, indolent, fat cats who lorded it over the lower classes and didn't produce anything. Well, that's not true. They produce quite a lot, including advanced spacecraft, and are working on a large number of projects, solar energy and agricultural projects, and they have animal husbandry because they have animals on Urras. They don't have any animals on Anarres, which is basically a desert. And so he's rather impressed by the society, despite the fact that he loathes the idea of property ownership and patriarchal society where women aren't allowed to attend university. For instance, several of his physics tutors on Anarres were women. Some of the best physicists were women. Well, that's not allowed on Urras. And he disagrees with this. He has a conversation with the sister of his host, who he finds very attractive. Her name is Via, and says, don't you resent, being looked at as a second-class citizen? And she basically says, no, because that's not really the way it is. Women actually run things. Men only think they run things. And that's, of course, an interesting contrast that LeGuin throws in there. One of the things he said, one of the things that a war breaks out on another continent, and the nation that he's living in is called AIO, and there's another nation called Thew, and they are fighting over this other continental society called Benbili, and they're interfering. And one of those people, who is kind of a warmonger, says to Shevek on page 250, Odonianism is quote-unquote womanish. It doesn't include the virile side of life, and by the virile side, he means violence, and that disgusts Shevek to a great degree. He finally he wants to unite with or meet with the lower classes. Someone slips a note into his pocket and he doesn't know who, that says, "Come meet with us, brother, and we were with you and we support you." And he doesn't know who slipped it into his pocket. He's trying to find out, and people are sort of stymieing him. Oh, don't bother about that. Well, he talks to a man who is the butler of his host and servant, and he's saying, where can I contact these people? And he says, I can't tell you that, I'll get in trouble. But eventually he cajoles him enough that he tells him, go to the street called Joking Lane in this part of Neo-Essia, and they'll help you. And he goes there, and even when he gets there, people are very reluctant to. He sees poverty, and he sees people living on the street without any employment. That doesn't happen on Anarres. Anyone who wants work can get work, but they also don't penalize people who don't work. which I thought was interesting. That kind of goes against the idea of mutual aid, but that may be one of the ambiguities that LeGuin is pointing to. He contacts these people, and they take him to what's going to be called, they're going to have a general strike. They're against, the oppression that they're receiving from the quote-unquote the owners, as they call them, and they're going to have this general strike, and there are going to be thousands of people, and it is violently and horribly suppressed. The Anarresti army comes, Urrasti army comes and starts shooting at these people with helicopters. They're unarmed, and he is horrified as people are killed, and he has to run away, and the man is with him who's had his hand shot off, and black man, and he runs into a basement, which is the only place he can hide, and is terrified, and eventually the man dies. He begs for asylum at the Terran embassy in the OSE, and he's given asylum by Kemp, the female Earth ambassador, and she's very interested in him. She's talking about that Earth has never had contact with Anarres. They've only had contact with Urras, so they don't know about his form of society. He's trying to explain to her what the good of it is, and what he wants to do with his theory, that he wants to give it to everybody for free. He does not want it to have only to be, quote unquote, sold to Urras who have come to look at him as their property. He doesn't want that. He wants it for everybody, the Anarresti, the Urrasti, even this race called the Hainish, who are a friendly, non-human but humanoid race who have high technology and who help out all the quote-unquote 9 worlds. She doesn't explain what the 9 worlds are, though obviously 4 of them are Hain, Earth, Anarres, and Urras. And I think one of them is Rokanan's world, and one of them is the I can't remember the name, but the planet in Left Hand of Darkness is one of those worlds. So he's trying to explain this to the Earth ambassador. One of the interesting things, she slips in a lot of kind of funny things, like they can't, in his language it's called Pravik, they can't curse, because she said when sex is not dirty and there's no fear of damnation, it's very hard to curse. But he does tell people at a certain point to go to hell. But he doesn't, interesting because he doesn't really believe in hell. So that's kind of, he says to his hosts, he says to the guy who's dying, actually, "You're contemptible," he said in Pravik to his companion. "You cannot keep doors open. You will never be free." And that's one of his, criticisms of Urrasti society. Then on page 290, she says, this is interesting, "The Odonian society was conceived as a permanent revolution, and the revolution begins in the thinking man. He was therefore," and then it goes on a little bit, now talking about Shevek, and why he doesn't fit in. The title of the book is a bone of contention with many people. What does it mean? Does the dispossessed mean the Anarresti, who do not own any possessions, or does it mean Shevek, who is neither possessed by the principles of Anarres or Urras? I think that's more what it means. He's the dispossessed. He's the person who doesn't fit. He's the square peg in a round hole throughout the entire novel. 291, he says, "Fulfillment," Shevek thought, "is a function of time." That's kind of an interesting thing. They reveal the Earth ambassador reveals that there's a Hainish ship that's in orbit of Urras, and that it could help him. He wants asylum. He doesn't want to be on Urras anymore. He thinks of Urras, after what he's seen after this slaughter, as hell, and he just wants to go back home to Anarres and be with his partner Takfur and his daughter Sadik, who is now 10 years old by the end of this story. And they're talking. He talks to again the Earth ambassador King about the Ansible, and she says, "What's an Ansible?" And he says, "I think it's a very simple matter. This simple matter might change the lives of all the billion peoples in all the 9 worlds. It will make a league of worlds possible, a federation," she says, after he talks to her about it. And he says, "Do you understand that I want to give this to you and Hain and the other worlds?" I'm going to read this whole quote to you. It's on page 301. I want to give you and to the countries of Urras, but to you all, so that one of you cannot use it, as AIO wants to do, to get power over the others, to get richer, or to win more wars, so that you cannot use the trust for your private profit, but only for the common good. King says in response, in the end, the truth usually insists upon serving only the common good. He says, in the end, yes, but I'm not willing to wait for the end. I have one lifetime, and I will not spend it for greed and profiteering and lies. I will not serve any master. I think that's, again, a good indication of Shevek's character and his dedication to this idea, both of Odonianism and of the fact that he wants to give this technology to everyone, not just one side or the other. There's a funny quote on page 33. Again, LeGuin throws in humor through quite a lot of this book. One of the things that it's Takver who's talking to him about going to Urras. This is before he goes. He says, what good is an anarchistic society that's afraid of anarchists? That's kind of a funny thing. On 331, she says, if our society is settling down into politics and power seeking, then we'll get out. We'll make an Anarres beyond Anarres, a new beginning. Is that okay? And he says, yes, of course. On 336, he says something interesting. He says, we are the children of time. In the end, he is given asylum aboard the Hainish ship, which is in orbit around Urras, and they're going to take him back to Anarres, which is what he wants. He arrives back on Urras, and Anarres, and he regrets that he didn't take with him a plush pig that he had gotten for the child of a friend. He says, I will lie down to sleep on Anarres tonight, he thought. I will lie down beside Takver. I wish I'd brought the picture, the baby sheep, to give Pilon. But he had not brought anything. His hands were empty, as they has always been. There again is one of the central tenets. Obviously, this is, in some ways, a critique of the Cold War. The ridiculousness not only of one side, but of both sides. The communists versus the capitalists. And she points up the negativities of both and absurdities of both systems. I think some people thought when this came out that she was, being, pro-anarchist or pro-communist. That's not true. If you read the entire book, and there are a lot of, subtleties throughout it, she's basically giving a critique of both forms of society. And that's the central, that and the idea of breaking down walls, the fact that we build walls around each other. We build walls around society, we build walls around ourselves, we'll build walls around others, and unless we break those down, we're not really quote-unquote free. You can think you're free within this either one of the societies, but you're not really unless you're willing to embrace the idea of the other, the idea that there are other ways of doing things and other ways of thinking. It's really quite an excellent book. I highly recommend it. I obviously haven't gone over everything. I'm not going to, but I think you should discover it yourself. I read it like I said, in 1974 in high school, and I was allowed by my English teacher to write a paper on it in lieu of reading a book on the Cold War. And I made the analogies and connected the dots, as it were. And I got an A+ on that paper, so obviously I got it. I think you'll get it too when you read it. It's interesting, it's quirky. It mentions what would become known as quantum entanglement, but that's what Shevek's principle of simultaneity is. The idea that a particle on planet A could communicate with a particle on planet B that's thousands of light years away instantaneously. And that also is what the Ansible is. And she mentions the Ansible in a couple other novels, I think also in The Left Hand of Darkness, primarily. Good book, very good read, very well deserved of the 3 rewards it received. Also, her book, The Left Hand of Darkness, also received the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Locus Award, which puts it in a very rare class with other books that include Dune by Frank Herbert, The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein, The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi, which is a really excellent book. If you haven't read it, you should. Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and very few others. There's a list of them if you want to look them up, but there's like 15, and that's it. And this is definitely deserved of all those rewards, so please go out and read it.